Okay, in this lesson we're going to continue learning how to solve quadratic equations using different algebraic methods, and today we're going to focus on solving quadratic equations by taking the square root. I want you to think back to exponents and think about what it means to find 3 squared. 3 squared means that we're going to do 3 times 3, okay, which is 9. So that means 3, let's see, try that again. 3 times 3, which is 9. Okay, then what does it mean to do negative 3 squared? Well, negative 3 squared means we're going to do negative 3 times negative 3, which is also 9. Okay, so a square root undoes the power of 2. When solving by taking a square root, you must remember that there are actually 2 solutions, and you have to include the plus or minus symbol. And here's why. If I take the square root of 9, notice that I had the same answer here for 2 values. Okay, so the square root of 9 is actually going to give me positive 3 and negative 3 because 3 times 3 is 9, but negative 3 times negative 3 is also 9. So what we use is a plus or minus symbol. So we say the square root of 9, when we're solving, is plus or minus 3. Do not forget that plus or minus sign. Okay, so to solve by taking square roots, you're going to start by isolating the variable or group that is being squared, and then take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus symbol. Simplify the radical if the number is not a perfect square, and then isolate the variable if it already isn't done. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. So, solve each quadratic equation by taking square roots. For the first one, since we have a squared alone, all we're going to do is go ahead and take the square root of a on both sides. So the square root of a squared gives me a. And then we're going to think back to the simplifying radicals where we took the 54 and we looked for the perfect square that goes into it. So the perfect square that goes into 54 is 9 times 6. So remember, the square root of 9 is 3, and we can't take the square root of 6, so we're going to leave that. So plus or minus 3 square root of 6. If we do the second one, and take the square root of both sides, this is a special case. The square root of a squared is a, but I cannot take the square root of negative 9. If you type that in your calculator, it actually gives you an error. We've talked about that a little bit before, but if we have the square root of a negative, that actually means we have something called no real solutions. Okay? In Algebra 2, you will actually build on that and learn how to use something called imaginary numbers. In Algebra 2, you'll actually be able to solve this problem with those imaginary numbers, but for now, we're just going to write no real solutions. You could also write your empty set symbol. Okay, next 2 problems. We need to make sure we isolate the part that's being squared first. So if you look in this first problem, the part that has a square is this here. Okay, we need to get rid of that. Sorry, not rid of that. We need to get rid of anything on the outside of that. So we want to get this by itself. Okay, we need to get this alone. Think about how you would cancel that 9. And a common mistake is that students will actually try to subtract the 9. In this case, we need to divide by 9 on both sides. So I get n squared equals 4. 36 divided by 9 is 4. Now that that square is by itself, we're going to take the square root of both sides. The square root of 4 is 2. Don't forget your plus or minus sign. You're done. That's it. Okay? Next one. Need to get the r squared alone. So that means we're going to get rid of that 6. So we're going to subtract 6 from both sides. So we get r squared equals 10. Take the square root of both sides. If you think back to what we did with our factor trees, the only 2 numbers that go into 10 are 2 and 5, and I can't break those down at all. So we're going to leave this as a square root of 10. Okay, go ahead and try a few problems with those. Have them checked out. Make sure you understand them. When you're ready, move on. Okay, couple more problems here. Still need to make sure the part that's being squared is by itself. So this time, we're going to have a couple steps. We need to get this n squared alone. So we are going to start by subtracting 8 from both sides. So I get 2n squared equals 40. Still need to get the n squared alone. We're going to divide by 2 on both sides. So n squared equals 20. And then take the square root. So if I break down my 20, the biggest perfect square that goes into 20 is 4. And that's 4 times 5. So the square root of 4 is 2. I can't break down the square root of 5, so I'm going to leave that. And then I put my plus or minus sign out front. Okay, next one, we're going to subtract 3 from both sides. So I get 16b squared equals 4. We're going to divide by 16 on both sides, and I'm actually going to reduce that. B squared equals 1 over 4. Okay, 4 16ths reduces to 1/4. Last step here, we need to take the square root of both sides. So when you're taking the square root of a fraction, you take the square root of the numerator, so the square root of 1, which is 1, and the square root of 4, which is 2, and you are finished. Okay. Next one looks a little different because there are some parentheses in there, and it changes how we approach that first part. Okay, this whole thing is being squared, so we need to go ahead and make sure that part's by itself before we take the square roots. And notice that the parentheses are the only thing on that side. So we're going to go ahead and do this way. Take the square root of both sides. Square root of 16 is 4. Don't forget your plus or minus sign. Now, you'll notice that this time, which is a little different than the other ones, we have something left with our n. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and split this into two parts. This means we have two equations. The first one is n minus 2 equals 4. And the second one is n minus 2 equals negative 4. And we need to solve each of those. So we're going to add 2 to both sides for the first one, which gives us 6. And we're going to add 2 to both sides for the second one, which gives us negative 2. Okay. Common mistake that I see here is students will take the square root of 16 and they'll get 4. Then they're going to add 2 to both sides and they're going to get 6, and then they put their plus or minus sign in front. You need to make sure you split this into two equations back at this step here before you do your plus 2 on both sides. Otherwise, it's going to give you the wrong answer every time. Okay, let's do one more like that. We're going to take the square root of both sides. Since I can't take the square root of 7, and 7 is prime, we can't break it down, we're going to leave it. So we have plus or minus the square root of 7. Now this one's a little different. You don't actually have to write two equations if you don't want to when you do it this way. I'm going to still subtract 3 from both sides to get the b alone. And then this, I can't combine together. So it's going to look like that. Negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 7. Okay, go ahead and try a few of those. Make sure you understand them. If you have any questions, let us know. Get some extra practice. When you're ready, go ahead and take your quiz, and then you can move on if you understand it and do well.